Samyukta Bhagat. I teach at C. We're gathered here for the second panel of the day called Space and Other Mediums for the undergraduate thesis symposium. We've had a nice meal and we're ready to dive into the second panel now. With us, we have our discussants, Kush Patel and Sonal Mittal. Kush is the head of studies for contemporary art practice of the Masters of Art program at Shrishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology. And Sonal is the chair of Masters in Conservation and in the Conservation and Regeneration program at CEPT University. So with us, we have our three presenters in this panel, Prathamesh, Atisha, and Neil. And the larger charge that this panel essentially is situated in is how inhabitation occurs through different mediums. So by different mediums in this panel, we mean from the immersive environment of gameplay to the worlds that feminist fictions construct, to the image-making processes that, again, construct aspirations of ideal homes. So I won't prolong this, and I'll call the first discussant to come and present his work. So Prathamesh's work explores how video games construct immersive spatial experiences through varied beings, shaping player perceptions and cultural resonance. Prathamesh, you'll begin.
So my thesis title is as Decoding Environments of Computer Games. From a young age, my life has been intertwined with the digital media, but amongst the various digital experiences, computer games always has been drawn towards it. The fascination wasn't just about entertainment, it generated curiosity what makes these virtual spaces so engaging and why they resonate strongly over time. Immersion is a key concept in media studies describing the experience of complete absorption. The word immersion originates from the Latin term immersio, which means dipping into or engulfing, symbolizing how participants become enveloped in a narrative or environment. Computer games create immersion by combining interactive storytelling, rich visuals, and responsive gameplay. Unlike books, films, other genres, games make player active participants impacting the journey and choices, which amplifies their sense of presence within the game world. To analyze how immersion is constructed, I'll draw upon several key theoretical frameworks. First, I'll look into Durer's studies on perspective and explore Robin Evans' idea of projection. And I'll also bring in Le Corbusier's concept of architectural promenade as a framework for scenography. Additionally, I'll discuss how players embody characters and how video games as a medium impact culture. These frameworks will help me break down how virtual environments create immersive experiences. In this thesis, I will be using the term immersion to refer specifically to the relationship of the player and the game world. Immersion is not only just about visual or emotional engagement, but about a tangible interaction with the virtual environment. This leads me to my research question of how does spatial logic of computer games construct immersive experiences and how do they evolve beyond the screen to shape cultural interactions. This study looks at spatial logic of action-adventure games, focusing on their immersive abilities and cultural impact. I have chosen this genre for narrative elements, the depth, and intricate world building and interactive gameplay. By examining how these elements create immersion, the research aims to uncover the strategies game used to shape immersion and influence culture. So the first game, Stray, is an adventure game that follows the story of a stray cat navigating a post-apocalyptic city inhabited by robots. In Stray, the shifting perspective plays a key role in enhancing the immersion. As players control the cat, the camera adjusts fluidly between the environment and actions. In tight alleys and interiors, the close one-point perspective highlights the scale, emphasizing on movements. While the cat climbs higher, the perspective pulls back to give a broader view and surrounding context, showing the spaces are interconnected. These perspective changes are carefully designed to communicate narrative, creating rhythm between the intimate discovery and the larger scale exploration. The scenography in this game is shaped by the perception of space and narrative. The cat's position influences what the player sees and limited views highlighting tension and drawing focus on the obstacles. For example, in this scene, The light guides the exploration, and the dynamic interplay between the character position and scenography perspective gives player agency to sparking curiosity and deepening the connection in the environment, which makes the experience feel layered and immersive. Immersion in Stray becomes a dynamic relationship between the character and the player's picture plane. The perspective shift sync with the cat's position in space, drawing players deeper into the world. The picture plane separating the observer from the scene shifts with the spatial changes and enhancing the sense of immersion. In In Stray, the repetition of narrow alleys, rooftops, and interactive objects help players quickly grasp of how the cat navigates. The game's narrative and dialogues also trigger spatial memory, shaping the environment. Thus, the repetition builds familiarity, fostering a sense of control and connection with the space. As players encounter recurring patterns and visual motifs, they learn to anticipate their next move, creating a seamless interaction and deepens the immersion. For the next case, the game God of War is an action adventure game that follows the journey of Kratos, a former Greek god, living in the Norse realm of Midgard, and his young son Atreus after the death of his mother. The Kratos embarks on a journey to scatter her ashes from the highest peak of the Nine Realms. In God of War, the immersion in combat is driven through a deep embodiment of character, shaped by the interaction between the player and the environment. The character positioning and the game adaptive camera also play key role in immersion by pulling back for broader attacks or zooming in from intense moments. The three-point perspective provides a spatial awareness, while the overlap of one-point perspective focuses on the enemy, creating a layered experience. These overlapping of perspectives along with the camera movement are used as an effect during these combat scenes. In this scene, in this scene, just a second. In this scene, the immersion is shaped through use of environment storytelling, which introduces the layers of fog, visual cues, and uncertainty. These layers of fog not only obscure the visual landscape, but also obscure the player's perception of space. This uncertainty is compounded with hard turns and abrupt shifts, which players view serve as a tool to build tension and anticipation. The unpredictability of what lies ahead mirrors the psychological state of both character and the player. The interplay of fog, uncertainty, hard turns, and light deepens the immersive experience, engaging both cognitive and emotional aspects of the player. In God of War, the puzzles go beyond obstacles, enhancing the player's interaction and uncovering the game's layered narrative. Whether it's pulling levers, shifting gears, or deciphering runes, each of the challenge immerses players in the environment and encouraging exploration and deepening into the understanding of the game's world history and lore. The third case we'll be looking at is Assassin's Creed Unity, which takes place during the French Revolution in 18th century Paris, where the protagonist moves around the city as a fugitive. In Assassin's Creed Unity, the immersion is heightened through the use of multiple viewpoints and layered navigation, creating a rich multi-dimensional experience where players become highly aware of their surroundings, from bustling crowds and visual cues to interactive spaces. The ledges and the balconies provide like a CCTV vantage point, allowing players to access restricted areas or navigate the streets. Below the rooftops, after sweeping views that trigger parkour paths and new navigation routes, giving a bird's eye view perspective of the city and enhancing the sense of depth, scale, and vastness. A dynamic shift of planes further enhances the immersion as each level, whether the ground or the street or atop of buildings, adapts to the player's need, affecting the flexibility in how to approach challenges and navigate the environment. In the game, the crowd is just not a backdrop for an interactive space, but the crowd acts as an interactive place by plays a crucial role in the gameplay. The players use crowd to blend in, adopting to the role of an assassin, a fugitive evading enemies while navigating through chaotic streets. This mechanic allows for stealthy movement and mission completion. Blending in transforms the player both as a participant and a passive observer of historical events as they witness conversation, protests, and dramatic movements that enrich the narrative. The game leverages the historical accuracy and iconic landmarks of Paris to create an immersive experience that supports the spatial memory and navigation. Major landmarks serve as navigational anchors, guiding players through quests, exploration, while enhancing realism and placemaking. These landmarks are not just visual cues, but they are integral to gameplay and storytelling. This allows players to relive French Revolution events and interact with various social classes within the game. Video games today are not just modes of entertainment, they are evolved into a significant cultural phenomena that extend beyond the boundaries of the screen, impacting communities and creating subcultures that activates and shapes the gaming landscape. Fan communities dive deep into dissecting lore, building theories, and shaping interpretations. This collective analysis enriches the game's world, embedding into a broader cultural context as fans contribute their voices to expand the narrative universe. Such engagement often leads to creation of art and literature, even influences new game development, fostering a sense of belonging. Henry Jenkins calls this as convergence culture, where between the producer and the consumer blurs, promoting a space for collaboration and participatory culture. Beyond gameplay, video games continue to thrive through discussions on platforms like Discord and Reddit, where players share personal experiences and dissect what makes the games truly immersive. These conversations frequently focus on emotional responses which games evoke, whether it's tension or for difficult boss fight or an awe of exploring a vast world. Players analyze these aspects like shared communal experience that validates and enriches individual moments through collective dialogue. The analysis of immersion in games spaces demonstrates that these environments are far more than just visual backdrops. They are intricately layered with interactions and embedded narratives. This insight suggests that the architecture could adapt similarly dynamic layering to create immersive physical experiences, as exemplified by the way the plane shifts in God of War from expansive transitions to underscore the impact of the human perception and behavior. The concept of temporal and recursive spaces are evident in God of War's evolving settings and Stray's repetitive guidance mechanisms, suggest that spaces need not to be remain static, they can adapt and respond to the presence. Scenography also plays emerges as an essential for engagement, where the framing and choreography of the space directs focus and enriches narrative immersion, pointing to its potential as well as it looks scenography as more than an aesthetic use of perspective, as seen in Durer's methods. Durer's methods prove that shift in viewpoints can powerful for engagement controlled perspectives like straight distortion and rapid movement or the epic framing of the God of War. This research argues that video game spaces serve as dynamic laboratories for spatial exploration, where principles of movement, perspective, layering, and interactive design converge to craft deeply immersive experiences. In these virtual environments, scenography is not simply as an aesthetic choice, but a strategic tool for guiding players' behavior and perception, creating a seamless dialogue between the player, character, and the environment. Through this careful manipulation of camera angles, perspective shifts, and narrative framing, video games offer a unique way to engage and understand spatial dynamics in a way is both intuitive and emotionally. In conclusion, this research emphasizes that video game spaces are not just digital representations of physical environments, but are pioneering models of spatial design that can inspire and inform architectural practice. By applying the explored in this study, architects can create more immersive and engagement and emotionally resonant physical space, ultimately enriching the way in which people interact with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Prathamesh. When like we went through his presentation, it almost felt like through the cat in Stray or through the other characters, you're almost taking a derive through the entire video game. It's opening up the space in these very like these very fragmented places ways, and these different advantages are coming together, and it gives you like a sense of space very differently. But also like this whole community coming together and then again constructing a completely different imagination of a place. So with that, I'll call Atisha, whose work examines how fictional narratives, particularly those by female authors, reimagine gendered spaces and challenge conventional notions of home and public life. And she does the close and intimate reading of various texts to excavate these soft lived spaces that these texts open up.
Hello. My thesis is titled World Making in Fiction Narratives of Gendered Spaces. Fiction is often dismissed as escapism, yet it is a powerful tool for reimagining reality and exploring new possibilities. Female authored fiction, in particular, offers valuable insights into how women perceive and engage with domestic gender spaces. These narratives challenge conventional notions of domestic and social environments, highlighting alternative ways of inhabiting space. This leads to the question: how do fictional narratives by female authors reframe gendered, domestic, and social spaces? The thesis presents a comparative study across time, gender, and space, analyzing 8 works, 4 by men and 4 by women each, from the early 1900s to the 2000s. Set in varied locations, these works are explored within the narratives of their time. The female authored works above the line are Sultana's Dream by Begum Rukia, 1905, Orlando, a biography by Virginia Woolf, published in 1928, The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin in 1969, and A People's History of Heaven by Mathangi Subramanian in 2019. Below the line are male authored works: A Modern Utopia by H.G. Wells in 1905, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald in 1925, Dune by Frank Herbert in 1965, and The White Tiger by Arvind Adiga in 2008. The drawing method originated as a medium to engage with the site, the books themselves. Each book was carefully read to highlight how space was constructed, both physically and phenomenologically, and annotations were made. Then a comparative chart was made, cataloging every instance where space was discussed, split into domestic interior spaces and neighborhood or cityscapes. It enabled direct comparison across time, place, and gender. H.G. Wells and Begum Rukia write stories that are utopian. Wells focuses on a global, large scale society that integrates nature, technology, and governance, while Rukia emphasizes gendered spaces, reshaping domestic and public realms in opposition to patriarchal norms. These illustrations by Durgabai depict a society led by women, where men live in seclusion. Here, women rely on intelligence, science, and cooperation, not force. The Linocut series by Chitra Ganesh illustrates Ladyland as a garden that focuses on domestic spaces such as the kitchen and the bathroom, with an emphasis on neatness. In a modern utopia, H.G. Wells imagines an efficient, orderly society in harmony with nature, though nature is seen as a form of visual enhancement. While advocating gender equality, he still depicts men as heroic and women in secondary reproductive roles, revealing a subtle bias as seen in the illustrations by Edmund Joseph Sylvan. The next pair of books, written in 1925 and 1928 respectively, are The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald and Orlando, a biography by Virginia Woolf, written during the interwar period, reflecting societal shifts in identity, gender, and social mobility. Virginia Woolf writes about a young nobleman, Orlando, embarking on a life that spans several centuries, unexpectedly changing from male to female midway. Through this shift, Woolf uses Orlando's journey to examine the fluidity of time, identity, and gender, challenging fixed social roles and passage of time itself. In The Great Gatsby, Nick Carraway becomes a part of the life of Jay Gatsby, a wealthy and mysterious man driven by his love for Daisy Buchanan. Gatsby's obsession with Daisy is tied to his desire for wealth and status, representing the broader allure of the American dream. Even though both the books approach the idea of space and objects differently, they do talk about the materialistic quality of space and objects. Orlando does this by paying detailed attention to materials, colors, changes in activities, and habits. However, Fitzgerald grounds his descriptions in physicality and monetary value. This contrast is further reflected in their treatment of the central characters. In The Great Gatsby, the idea of the hero is prominent and everything is seen as an overview from his lens. Even though both talk about monotony in that age, in the previous two frames, they do so very differently. Dune and the Left Hand of Darkness, written post World War II, amid the atomic age and rising environmental concerns, likely reflect the influence of the rapid space race and the challenge of sustaining life on harsh planets. In The Left Hand of Darkness by Le Guin, Jen Li Ai, an envoy from Earth, arrives on the planet Gethin to invite its people to join an interplanetary alliance. Gethinians are unique with no fixed gender, which forces Jen Li to rethink his ideas of masculinity and relationships. In Dune, Paul Atreides and his family arrive on Arrakis, a desert planet rich in spice, the galaxy's most valuable resource. Betrayed, Paul escapes into the desert where he finds refuge with the Freemen, a resilient people who help him realize his potential as a leader and fulfill a prophecy related to Arrakis' future. Le Guin's approach in The Left Hand of Darkness is more imaginative, as she rethinks not only the spatial organization of the cities but also the social and cultural practices that emerge in response to the harsh climate of Gethin. Objects and structures are described with a focus on functionality, and the narrative extends to consider broader social, cultural, and environmental context. This drawing depicts how the city of Rare's configuration helps it adapt to different seasons. In Dune, Frank Herbert emphasizes physical space through precise numeric descriptions, highlighting social hierarchies and a drive for dominance. Adaptation to the climate appears secondary as characters focus on overcoming or covering up the environment's harshness rather than truly adapting to it. A constant divide exists between the rulers who have abundant resources and the people who endure severe hardships even to have access to a few resources. Mathangi Subramanian and Arvind Adiga write about contemporary India, exploring issues of class, poverty, and urban development. Just after the technological revolution and the globalization of 1990s, these books explore how characters, mainly from an impoverished background, respond to this rapidly urbanizing world. In A People's History of Heaven by Mathangi Subramanian, a group of girls in a Bangalore slum support each other through the pressures of poverty, inequality, and social expectations. Their friendship offers resilience, helping them challenge their environment. It was published a bit later than The White Tiger after the Me Too movement and the significant influence of social media, all of which clearly impacted the writing, particularly in terms of individuality in relation to globalization. In The White Tiger by Arvind Adiga, Balram Halwai rises from his poor background in rural India to become an entrepreneur in Bangalore. Through his narration, Balram shares his struggle against corruption, exploitation, and inequality. The descriptions in the book are generic in contrast to the highly specific descriptions of individuals and activities in the other book. Fiction novels are deeply intertwined with time periods in which they are written, reflecting, responding to, or critiquing the social, political, cultural, and economic conditions of their era. By analyzing the fictional construction of space, we can trace how events and influential narratives shape human aspirations and worldviews. For the cases of the 8 books that have been analyzed, these seem to be some of the common findings across time. In Sultana's Dream and a Modern Utopia, which were published in the early 1900s, Utopia blends technology with nature, envisioning connectivity and efficient transport systems rooted in order and beauty. By the 1920s, Orlando Biography and The Great Gatsby, set post World War I, continue exploring beauty and order, reflecting first world entitlement over consumption, and expanding spaces for work, public life, and women's increasing presence in the outdoor realm. By the mid 20th century, Dune and the Left Hand of Darkness address environmental crisis where survival and utility overshadow beauty, alongside explorations of gender and identity amid demanding settings. In the post-globalization era, authors like Mathangi Subramanian and Arvind Adiga portray chaotic urban life and the social effects of rapid growth, shaped by movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter. Space is now layered with class, caste, gender, and identity, marking a shift in its portrayal. Women's writing and men's writing reveal distinct patterns in how they perceive space. In an analysis of the 8 chosen, these are the common conclusions. Metrics of space. Men often approach space through numbers and monetary value, fostering a competitive and ambitious lens. This can result in spaces that prioritize productivity and efficiency. Women's approach, however, is more likely to center on inclusivity and responsiveness. The drawing is made in reference to the description of apartment blocks in The White Tiger. Networks and intimacies. Mathangi Subramanian talks about how solidarities and activities make the space an ever-changing one. Female authored works focus on friendships and connections, contrasting with male authored texts that only emphasize romantic or dominant relationships. Women write about environments that feel lived in and approachable, reflecting a desire to facilitate bonds. In contrast, male authored spaces are often grander, more rigid, and defined by structural dominance. Ideas of everyday. A modern utopia describes an extremely functional cityscape with everything divided into respective zones. Women's writing highlights everyday practices that shape space, making spaces multi-purpose and incremental rather than static and divided. Attention is given to interacting with things, to how body holds objects, maintains postures, and engages with materials. This results in a space planned for organic use rather than mere appearance. Male authored spaces, by contrast, often prioritize appearance over usability. Heroism and control. Male narratives frequently center on a single hero perspective, framing space as a stage for achievements or control. The space is then seen only through the hero's eyes, where each area holds significance mainly in relation to the protagonist's journey, which in turn leads to space being experienced as a stage for achievements, a platform for asserting dominance. Women's narratives, however, embrace reciprocal interaction, depicting space as a shared setting rather than one to be dominated. This study thus contributes to the ongoing debate on the role of fiction in architecture and spatial theory, questioning whether spatial agency is inherently gendered, and considers how literature can inspire more inclusive forms of spatial thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Atisha. In her work, essentially, fiction itself becomes a very powerful tool and medium to even enter the process of, say, drawing, but also detangle the idea of like extremely homogeneous, planned, and ordered realities. And then, how does one take this as a charge to even speculate more softer forms of inhabitation and that look at the idea of practices and phenomena? So we'll go to the next presentation by Neil. So he essentially looks at the idea of the image as a monolith, and then he looks at how does photography, and especially architectural photography, shape our understanding of home in the current times. He analyzes how images frame and construct idealized spatial and lifestyle aspirations.
The previous panel dealt very closely with the nature of the home, what constitutes it, and how it gets held and shaped through memory. When I look at the photographs shared by Anika, Khushbu, or Aditi, the home is very much a lived-in space brought together by the practices on those who inhabit it. One of the questions that emerged at the end of the panel dealt with how architects and designers could consider memory space or memory time in putting together of the design of the home. My thesis question interrogates the processes that put together the home and where the aspiration of the home lies, along with the visual culture from where they emerge. Growing up, I was a witness to my mother's crusade for a spotless, meticulously organized home which was ever ready to greet guests any time of the day. I was mostly indifferent about this as a child, but my defiance grew when this ritual had suddenly encroached upon my room one day. In answer to my continued curiosity and protest, she used to knowingly respond, "This is how a home should look. Ghar aisa hi dikhna chahiye." Reflecting on those memories, during my 4 years of learning architectural photography as well, I noticed a striking parallel in the framing of architectural practices. Each photo shoot has felt like staging a narrative involving meticulously selected props and post production. These two personal questions largely informed my curiosity on how as architectural representation through the photographic image shapes spatial language and aspirations within the contemporary imagination of the home. Since the entry in the thesis was through photographs, a large part of the research work involves on immersion in image theory, itself a vast field. Certain key readings, which happened to be seminal readings in this field, helped shape the form of my argument and also opened up conceptual terms that were important to define this work. These were On Photography by Susan Sontag, What Do Pictures Really Want by W.J.T. Mitchell, Image, Music and Text by Roland Barthes, Earth Moves, The Furnishing of Territories by Bernard Cash, and Architecture and its Photographic Image by Niels Gore. These texts help build up or set up a framework through uh, to which to read and understand images. They stand on each other's shoulders, and I bring them up in this presentation to open up the framing of the field. Susan Sontag's work sets up a basis to understand what we now consider a given, that photographic images shape and even replace lived experiences in contemporary culture. She says the primitive notion of the efficacy of images presumes that images possess the qualities of real things, but our inclination is to attribute to real things the qualities of image. Drawing on this, we might term our world as the image world, a cultural space where photographs do not merely reflect reality but actively reframe it. W.J.T. Mitchell introduces the term pictorial turn, where he says that the image world we have spoken of is one where relationships between institutions, people, and more are mediated by images rather than text, as happened in the literary turn. The primary extension of his argument is that the image is not something that is a static or an object, but the image itself has agency and asks for and demands to be read in particular ways. He says, pictures don't know what they want. They have to be helped to recollect it through a dialogue with others, asking that we ourselves become critical assessors of images rather than receive them passively. In architecture, the image of the built form wields a considerable power. Niels Gore acknowledges in his essay, Architecture and its Photographic Image, that most of our knowledge and vocabulary of architecture is mediated through images, which have increasingly replaced the direct tactile experiences of interacting with real spaces. Robin Evans also alluded to this in his essay, Architectural Projections, where he defines the projected image of a building to be put together by the text, the photographs, and the drawings that basically replace the tactile and the spatial experience of a building through this. In order that we be critical of the images that surround us, it is important to be anchored in what the image itself suggests, that we may read it better. Roland Barthes became a key text to open up a semiotic reading of the images. He separates the image into three layers, which is the linguistic image or the caption, the denotation, which is the literal message of the image, and the connotation, which is the hidden image or the symbolic image that it connotes. The thesis study also works in three chapters or three layers. The first is titled Making Images. In it, I look closely at the process of documenting or photographing an architectural project. This is a long and careful process involving many professionals with specific tasks that set up the space being photographed. Before the shoot, a recce visit is planned where the photographer, along with their team, the architect, and their practice, along with the client, a stylist, etc., discuss the ways to frame the building. Specific vantages are chosen. Certain spaces are included, some are left out. This framing is not planar telling of the plan, where all the spaces and their adjacencies become evident. Very often, spaces that are utilitarian that support the life of its inhabitants do not become a part of this narrative. In a shoot that I was a part of, I noticed that there is a hurry to document the building before inhabitants start living, in order to show the build form as pristine without ever having to deal with the objects and mess of an habitation of people. On the day of the shoot, the photographer captures a lot of images from the multiple vantage points as planned on the recce day. We shot it in through multiple exposures so as to create specific atmospheres in post-processing. The role of the stylist here is also an important one. They are the people who stage the space, bringing in props to populate an image, arranging furniture, suggesting life through meticulously arranged bed covers, steaming coffee cups, etc. The scene is extremely theatrical, each element of the frame carefully selected. Finally, he edits out all the visual distractions out of the curated sets of photograph, making the visual as pristine as possible. This approach results in a constructed advertorial representation of the home, where the house is a controlled theatrical scene. The role of the photographers and the stylist is to orchestrate the one aligned with the architect and the client's vision. These images, attached with complementing text, gets disseminated through multiple architectural media. The process was especially useful to understand how the image of the home, rather than holding life and its complexities, is a carefully crafted and visually controlled thing that emerges from the collaborative processes of a host of professions. For the second part of the study, analyzed three well-published residential projects, examining how they convey the idea of the home. In each case, the home is framed as an admired object, a retreat, or a space for social display, reimagined as an aestheticized symbol of consumption and personal identity. From the set of published images that are readily available online, I have attempted to read them semiotically, thinking carefully about what the framing of the project suggests about the nature of the house and its inhabitants. I will be discussing one of them here. Beton Root Residence by the Great Architects, finished in 2022, is a concrete home for a client located in Ahmedabad. The image here frames the building as theatrical. The larger volume and its successive ones, as well as the image, use exaggerations and extensions of the lines of the building to bolster this dramatic framing. The house is immediately assertive of its presence. The client owner takes in the view from the top of the building. The image suggests that he's surveying what is before him, almost as if it were a domain. The internal spaces are large, double-heighted, crafted volumes. The quote-unquote living spaces of the house are of various kinds and spread across various levels. There are many kinds and scales of retreat to host many kinds and scales of intimacies of gathering there, all well attached to the larger overall volume of the house. The frame of the image extends and encloses the length of the space. The home is an expansive yet enclosed territory from where a certain kind of control can be exerted over the remaining spaces, since they are all visually connected. A highly wrought jharoka window is an extension of the bedroom, looking into the common space. The image, the object, the woman at the window are considered references. The spaces and its telling are meant to produce the idea of the inhabitant as cultured, well-traveled, even moneyed. Beton Brute harnesses the theatrical possibilities from this reference to brutalist architecture to produce the idea of a home as a coveted, constructed object that has a pronounced presence in its context, with its object and building material, and the framing constructing an idea of the inhabitant as having esoteric influences, a citizen of the world, as it were, with access to art, craft, and various kinds of culture. In the third chapter, I document the design processes of two architectural practices involved in residential design. My aim is to explore more broadly how images inform, shape, and travel through various phases of the design process. You can open the books to see fold out pages for better reference. Practice C is briefed to create a timeless, stylish space that blends elegance with practicality. A separate dining room is needed for a family meals, and a kid's bedroom with a study table, built-in storage, and a bed with additional storage is the brief of the project. The design process begins with a presentation that combines both the client's and the designer's references, on which the client provides feedback by drawing and selecting elements from the photos that they would like included in their home. The architect brings them into a spatial layout where the requirements of the family are brought together with the impressions of a familial home that are important to them. The presentation is sent to a 3D visualizer alongside the basic plans and elevations. The visualizer produces photorealistic renderings of the project in order that the client may visualize and what their home might look like, especially as an image. Various iterations of this are produced based on the references provided until the image of the home is closest to what the client desires. For practice B, the client here is looking to renovate their home, earlier designed as a space with Art Deco as a theme. They want to move away from Art Deco, opting for a more luxurious and functional design while wanting the design to reflect a sort of personal identity. The design is presented to the client all continuously from the same angles, who then provides feedback by attaching referenced images and comments via email. Drawing on images, I infer the home in the image world through some key terms. These designs produce photographic homes where visuals and feedback shape the ever evolving perception of a space. The photographic home exists not just as a physical space, but as an idealized object framed within a perpetual visual stream. This evolving narrative subtly guides residential design towards a vision grounded in imagery, suggesting a model of home that is both personally relevant and culturally constructed, embodying a imaged home rather than a reflection of daily life. The image continuity cycle. At the core of this approach is an image continuity cycle. Rather than originating from a unique spatial narrative, many decisions now emerge from circulation of images drawn from collages, fragments of images, or widely shared visual references like renders and catalogs, adding a new visuals that re-enter the cycle. In the making of the photographic home, images serve as cultural currency, influencing design's perception, exchange, and value. Beyond the representation, they shape norms around luxury and taste, defining desirability. As signifiers, which is suggested by Barthes, these images encode cultural meanings that guide both designers and clients in aspirational, socially driven choices. Bernard Cash, in his book Earth Moves, says a territory is not the immobile closed space of the context to which a building must be mimetically adjusted. The relation of architecture to territory is not that of a complete plan or organized system. Rather, architecture is the art of the frame, and the architectural in things is how they are framed. He describes three key functions of the frame. Separation, which involves creating boundaries within a space through elements like walls. Selection, using devices like a window that allows specific elements of the environment to be emphasized. And arrangement organizes these selected elements to produce a cohesive and effective composition. I want to conclude by asking a question related to the reading on Barthes, which is how to frame. Um, while answering the questions to my mom's imaged home, and my mother's aesthetic sensibilities, it seems, were partly informed by magazines like Inside Outside and Architecture Plus Design, which my father, as an architect, subscribed to, that ideally published these photographic homes. Thus, building on Bernard Cash's reading, I want to ask how to frame while exploring it through two dimensions: representation and spatial practice. Through representation, it invites us to consider what we include in the frame, what is left out, describing a need to be critical about images. How do we frame spaces, and what do our choices in framing reveal? Through spatial practice, I ask what should we frame while acknowledging different forms of inhabitation. In the sense, the home can be thought to frame a movement, to frame through memories, or to frame through incremental practices, and so on. Ultimately, how can the act of framing thus bring a shift in readings and practices and imagining? Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. His work always talks about that, how the image isn't really the reality, but an advertisement of an aspiration, largely. And then, like, how do we see the current framing that emerges in these images that also propels exclusions, but also sets up ideas of idealized homes. And all of these three works essentially also talk about how these different mediums not only represent space in specific ways, but also have the charge to destabilize and construct it. And with that, I'd actually like call Sonal and Kush for comments for their work.
Yeah, what a way to start the afternoon. No, thank you. Thanks, Pratmesh, Neil, and Atisha for each of your projects. There is a certain obsessiveness in each of your works, whether it is with video games, whether it is with literary texts, or the idea of the image. And I appreciate that, the kind of sort of nerdiness that comes with looking at something so closely and then you completely start theorizing it, studying it formally. So I appreciate that kind of literariness and obsessiveness in your work. I would just say that your presentations are very clear in terms of what and how and why you are interested in them. One question I'll just put it right up front for all three of you to reflect on as to how did you make the selections that you made, in terms of your case studies or in terms of the games, the literary texts, or even the choice of architectural projects. So what was that rationale and framing all about? But one thing that really stood out for me, implicitly or explicitly, is this relationship between notation and annotation across the three projects. I know, Atisha, you explicitly talk about annotation because that's part of your literary reading, but the idea of notation comes through also very clearly in Pratmesh's work. And then the interplay between notation and annotation, for me, really also stood out in Neil's project. So how might you reflect on the relationship between notation and annotation as we think about questions of representation, questions of architectural storytelling, whether it is, again, through text, through video games, or through the image? I also really appreciated, Neil, how your opening hook, starting with the tellings and retellings of your mom to sort of stage the house a certain way, and how you return to it in the end. I think it's a very clever way of not losing sight of where you're drawing your questions from. But then I loved how you ended the question with questions of framing and what it then means to frame something. And I think that idea of framing is resonant across all three projects as well, even though Neil spells it out very, very explicitly. And I really appreciated that. Atisha, in your case, I love the idea of annotations, particularly because they allow the reader to situate any text in its historical context. And And as much as you're looking at gendered readings of these texts, I couldn't help but feel troubled by the kind of binariness in your conclusions, that there is a very simplistic, at least in the presentation, binary conclusions to this is how men would write about space, and this is how women have historically, or in terms of fiction, written about space. And I'm inviting you to consider, rather than a kind of a male-female binary, thinking about what is it about um, questions of power, location of power, mobilizing power that comes through each of these texts. And this is again, proximity of gender to power, location of gender and power, mobilizing of gender and power, which would invite you to think and extend your project into much more feminist readings of these works, and then what becomes of space. So I'm trying to sort of invite you to think much more critically so that the project is then not so simplistic and not, it doesn't, I mean, there's such a promise there, but then if you reduce it to a very simplistic understandings, then one loses the potential for what ultimately the relationship of space power is all about. Pratmesh, in your work, I couldn't help but think with Bernard Shumi's, I mean, it was immediately the idea of space event movement really kind of stood out for me, but also, you know, James Joyce's work that was also a literary text that Shumi started with. And I quite like the idea of you thinking with what is it about the different notations of space that come through. So I think if you can bring that out as I'm thinking about it in each of your case studies, that would be useful to be able to then say, okay, then this is what you're trying to ultimately get to, is that no, it's not just, as you said, it's not just representing space, but perhaps it's also inviting a theorization of space. So how are you bridging that? Because ultimately the idea of video game and game theory is also to evoke new understandings of space and habitation, subjectivity. Yeah, and to Neil, I think the specific question would be this idea of how to frame. So because you have chosen, you know, your projects are very intentionally these detached homes of a certain class and clientele. And because the question is so potent, when you conclude, I think it's a brilliant question. But I wish there was a wider sort of contexts that would lead you to then what becomes the question of framing. So if you can reflect a little more as to why are your types so similar? And what is it about cultural elitism and architecture that is also the problem of contemporary framing of architecture, and hence the project of reframing architecture must begin to look at architecture beyond that kind of bracketing of class and space. So that's something to think about. Yeah, thanks.
Well, or do you want to respond? Uh,
Okay, thank you, all three of you, and I agree with Kush. It was a very engaging. All three presentations were very engaging, and we could really see like how invested. Like you are a gamer, you are a book lover, you are a photographer, probably. So, but I think I'll just develop on what Kush was saying, and I think all three of your projects are all constructions, right? You are dealing with constructions. And I think somewhere implicit in all your narratives was the idea of intention, but it's not coming explicitly out. So the construction of whether a gaming environment or a construction of an image to be put on a magazine, or a construction of, you know, an imagination of a woman's world, and all these are all constructions, but with the intention. That intention, if you are able to make explicit, that will help you probably answer Kush's question, like, you know, where are you situating your study in? Like, what is that intentionality? And that intentionality frames the, actually, intentionality guides the framing. Hmm? So I think all your projects are constructions, and that binds your projects. So I'll start, like, say, for example, with Prathamesh. Um, it, this Paris one, Assassin's Creed, that diagram, is it like, is it a reminder of the derive, the Guy Debord situationist? Huh? Uh, it's like that. But the time period is like way back. So there is a lot that is going on in terms of, I mean, it's very interesting because Guy Debord talks about that there are these moments in the city which are very, which are all, you know, you do never experience them, all of them together. They appear to you in bursts. And then, you know, you detach yourself from the city in moments, and then the city again appears. This is the real life experience. And when you say the immersion is an absolute from the real world into this world, and there is a sense of sequence. You are continuously immersed in that, and the immersion continues to like get more and more intense. Or so I think um, I I feel that this project has a lot of potential to 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 expand its conversation beyond the visual, because it's immersion, it's very embodied, but it's embodied without it being actually broken downable into smells, sounds, vision, and all. That embodiment is a total detachment from where you are in the room. So, you know, you put your devices and you, whatever that, you know, AR, VR machines, and then, so it's a detachment. No, you're also embodily detaching yourself from the world, and then you are going in there. So, this immersion and your emphasis on the perspective and the architectural sonography and all is all right. But I think in terms of what does it do, like the sequence is very important for the person to remain immersed in that. So I think the immersion, you might want to like expand your definition of the immersion, the idea of immersion from beyond just the visual. Um, and you, Disha or Adisha? Adisha, sorry. I had a very similar observation as question, I think, about the binary, and similar observations about like very good job about the annotations and how you are reading and bringing things out. Um, and again, like it is like approach maybe a bit reductionist. It's like the woman versus the book, the men thing. But what I really appreciated in your presentation were those drawings. Like they were your drawings of you know the Great Gatsby, and I don't know, I just couldn't help but think that here you are also an author in that sense, like the author um, of those drawings where you are reading something and then you're translating it to again another fictionalized imagination of that. And the fact that there is, you are a woman, and then you like there is some kind of a, you know, intention that comes with that. So I don't know, like I would like be very happy to hear if you have any thoughts about your subjectivity in bringing that out, and what agency do you like, you know, extend in these projects. And Neil, I really enjoyed like that you are very well aware that these, I don't think it was naive, like I really enjoyed that you were well aware that these projects are so constructed and they appear like naive, but they are not, and they have a certain market, And so the market is also for the architect as well as for the client, right? Both of them want to project themselves in a certain way. And that is where, again, I'll just like piggyback on what Kush was saying, like, who's I mean, who is framing and for what purpose. So I just like will leave all three of you on with this certain idea, like the frame, because these are all intentions, frames, and constructions. You don't see anything outside of the frame. Like you're meant to imagine that there is this world, the cat's world, which is outside, but it's never constructed. It's never completely constructed. So there is a very interesting piece of writing that Derrida did. It's called the Parergon. And some of you might be aware of it, but Parergon, if you break it down, it's like parer gone. Ergon is work. So the Parergon, the frame, it says the frame is the work. There is a painting and then you frame around it, and then you think that frame is not important, it's what it frames. But what Derrida says, the work is not complete without the frame. And in your case, it becomes even very, very relevant to see that. So you are saying that it leaves out a lot of things. But in your case, it's not even constructed, right? And so if you are able to like build or show us some examples like that, that would be very interesting. There's a very interesting movie, which I don't know if you're familiar with. It's if you have not like watch all movies by this guy called Peter Greenaway. Yes, he, huh? A draftsman's contract. Huh? So a draftsman. Oh my God, it's amazing. It's like so sarcastic and like it's tedious to watch, and the tedium is the sarcasm. So it's like a 14th century Versailles kind of palace setting where there's just so much of tedium to do things a certain way, and it's always shown through a frame because it's the draftsman who's being contracted to draw the drawings of that palace. And it's the time when the perspectival images were coming into view. So he's putting the pencil and the camera's frame is there constantly. And there is so much of tedium in like idhar, udhar, kya hona chahiye, and like pushing things away. And that's coming through all of yours. But I think that how narratives are constructed, how fiction is constructed by that intention of either not taking the tedium of drawing it or eliminating things out. So very interesting. I think all three media are very well brought together in this panel. So if you would like to respond to this.
I think the first thing that you asked was how did you make the selection of the set of books, I think. So I started with Sultana's Dream. It was a text that was introduced in our second year, and I grew very fond of that text. And eventually, the thesis moved into a comparative study that went across time because I realized that the notion of space and everything that is connected to it has changed across time. And then that reading of analyzing fiction and how it's constructed due to certain events that have taken place became important, and that is why these books were selected, which are so all of the books have certain similarities. Both of the first book, Sultana's Dream and A Modern Utopia, are both essentially utopias that were written in 1905, even though the places where the authors were situated were extremely different, where Sultana's Dream is in Bengal and that's in England. The second set of books are both by first world authors, that's Virginia Woolf and F. Scott Fitzgerald, but both of them talk a lot about social spaces, and these books were selected in order to So it's how they frame their narratives and to see what, like how they frame space and what they choose to put in the reading and not put or not view in the reading. So the third book was after the Great Depression and World War One, and Dune and the Left Hand of Darkness talk about extraterrestrial planets and harsh climatic environment, because a lot of climatic conditions and environmental crisis narrative was going on at that point. So those two books, they are also regarded as really great science fiction books. Both of them have won similar awards in their categories, and they were chosen for that reason. Said that the on what they choose to do the on what basis do the authors choose to do the world making becomes important. And for the last set of books, both of the books are based in India, and both of them talk about how urbanization and extremely fast-paced world affects people essentially, and that is how the books were selected across time. Yeah, I realized that it's a very stark binary that I think for me, I've resolved that binary now, but I don't think it came across in the presentation. It came out during the last review as well that it's become a very stark binary. But so Virginia Woolf says that you have to be androgynous to write a good book, because you cannot write it from either perspective. It will become very, I don't know. So I feel that across time, initially when there was a very stark binary, but now because of dispelling agency, I think, and growth of social media and things like that, there has been a lot of inculcation of multiple worldviews into fictional making. I don't think it was there previously, but I think right now people are really getting into it, which I feel if I would have maybe studied further, the presentation would have gotten to that point. And for the drawings, um, so I think largely because my grandmother made me extremely fond of reading. She used to tell me stories back when I was a kid, and she will not admit to being a feminist. She cannot. I don't know. She cannot because she is, but she'll not admit to it. And she sees the space in a particular way, and she draws things in a particular way. And I think the drawings, after I drew them, were largely driven by how she views things and how she has made her space now. I think that's the case.
So for me specifically, the choice of games was looking at. So I have playing games for a long time, and there was this shift which happens in the past a decade where there is an advancement in technology and graphics, and the way the games are also trying to inculcate a way of a medium of a storytelling. So these so since past decade there was this genre called action and adventure. So it's a interplay between the whole storytelling, which is done through a medium of a video game, and that became a larger choice of for me choosing the genre itself, that how with the narrative the world is also getting constructed and what is that imagined world, because in a way some of the games are kind of, in a way there are familiar, that there is a familiarity in the way the spaces are designed, but the way in which one inhabits it, or the way in which the game design layer or the theoretical layer has been layered over it, and the way then how you navigate or you move in a space gives them complete different alteration of how to look at a city or a space differently. So specifically in three games, the first one, Stray, was very interesting for me because it was a very interesting point where I never played a game from a point of view of being a cat or an animal, and then a very lowered perspective and the way in which the cat moves and navigates, as well as like the larger thing I was more interested in was how do I then start thinking like a cat, because there is a layer of character embodiment which happens over the time as you kind of get used to the movements and the actions in the game during the initial part. The game design works with that, but then how you so the Stray was also inspired, the design of the game was inspired from the Kowloon city of Hong Kong, So the way it is, the constructed, it is inspired from that. But then how you navigate the space as a cat is very interesting. And then you particularly choose to not go through the lower round. You might want to jump around, you want to go through a specific route, and then it is more grounded. So that was more interesting. For Assassin's Creed, it was more interesting about looking at a city of Paris from multiple vantage points rather than just navigating through streets. But at the same time, how does he, as a fugitive, because he's not belonging to the space, but also like there are people who don't want him there, then how does he kind of blend in? Then also like he wants to hide from people, so he uses these different vantage points and different modes of navigation to kind of navigate through these spaces. And for the God of War, it was more like uh, there is a layer of Norse mythology, but of course it's fictional. It is not completely accurate, but it kind of also gives you the feel of embodying a storyline of a history and how mythology also works. Then moving ahead about relating with the theory part of it. So largely my question was about the frame. Like because of the camera, you largely the zoom in and the zoom out. Uh, it creates a relationship between the character position and the environment. So when you zoom in too much into the character, the environment ahead also kind of shapes of the or the frame. So you also kind of the kind of decisions you take in the game itself while navigating a space, or there are multiple layers into it, which is like having side quests or like exploring the area itself. And that made me interested about how then these framing techniques basically then makes the player kind of navigate the space, or creates that curiosity or uncertainty to kind of guide player to a certain movement or to a certain achievement or a goal. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, to answer first on how I landed on the current field, I think it was a very natural process. Starting with how I am, I wanted, like, once I started reading theories about the image world, I wanted to see everything that is there. Where Prasad suggested that I could use the medium of magazines then to read the images of home. But it got too extensive to a point where I wasn't able to anchor anchor an argument anywhere. Where because I was seeing a nation and instead of the imagination. Nextly, then which so that was when I understood that there was a need to read the images. First, learn reading the images, which was when my mentor suggested me Roland Barthes. So through that, then I started reading images, and that's how it uh, basically subjected to this field. Replying on why these specific sets of projects, I would like to start by a quote by Susan Sontag again. Uh, she says a capitalist society requires a culture based on images. It needs to furnish vast amounts of entertainment in order to stimulate buying and anesthetize the injuries of class, race, and sex. It needs to gather unlimited amounts of information to better exploit natural resources, increase productivity, keep order, make war, give jobs to bureaucrats, etc. The camera's twin capacities to subjectivize reality and to objectivize it ideally serve these needs and strengthen them. Through this, I want to base that uh, through what I have learned in the past few years is, and through seeing my dad's practice also, is that architects also serve a certain sort of society. The projects that get published, the projects that we get to see, and the projects that are available readily on global platforms are these projects that are for a certain set of society. So it naturally led me to then reading these sorts of images and a certain question कि ये घर बन भी कैसे रहे मतलब what where are these whole homes coming from, which me and my roommate constantly keeps discussing on what is even the basis of then making these um, homes. And I think also a certain sort of subjectivity of where I come from and where I am based. For the practices that I read and that I documented, the process was slightly difficult because no firm or no architect wants to show you their whole process or show you their whole documentation. So this documentation happened through anonymous friends who have done internships in these firms and collecting data to them and then putting it together. So if this field then certainly expands where architecture opens itself to a critique, then maybe I'll be able to see all other sets of projects, which would be very interesting.
Neil, it's very interesting that you said the architecture community is still very confined, but it's like just stalking people on social media posts. There is this one photographer, architect photographer, Prachi Kaskiwala. Do you know her? Do you know her? She reveals her process.
Yeah, she
Her
shows
whole
she's
Instagram
ironing
thing
the.
is like, okay, this is the room, but now I'm drawing these curtains here. I'm putting this flower bouquet here. And then the whole focus is on her team and how much time and intention, time and stay. So, like, for her, the project is the staging. Hmm? So, so she invites people to look at the staging. She's not interested in the final image, and she's not interested in the architecture. She's actually interested in the staging, and that is your area where from where you bring, hmm, uh, populate your research from those kind of, who are interested in the staging. They will be giving you the meat to talk about how staging happens and things like that.
But I mean, staging has been inherent to architectural photography in general since ages. The term of architectural photography has been like that.
Yeah.
And like I, like for the last panel when we discussed how memories shape the home, uh, it came as a thought that uh, how much ever we discuss the home through these little moments, how much ever I describe my home through my to my friends through these little moments, when I think of what sort of home do I want for myself, or someone thinks of what sort of home do they want for themselves, they inherently or some ways in some ways I mean I always have this image in my mind where it will always be some sort of very like line space. Maybe it's because I'm an architectural photographer, but in general, I think it comes for everybody because then how do you talk about these? I talk about it in these terms, but I always think about it in the very like non um, sort of grounded terms. So that is the thought that I'm having with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But what Seema Prachi, what she puts out is proper masala content. Everybody wants to see how a space is being framed, but post realizing that also it still remains very sterile. That whole.
See, I think it's very important for you because I think you are navigating a lot of terrains and you think that everywhere the same question, everyone will have the same question, but not necessarily. See, architect wanting to frame their images will have a very different intention. So go with the intention. If you want to more densify your research, and the photographer will have their own intention. See, even photography, and we are using the bad word here, which is the discipline and the capitalism involved in it. So photographers, the way they are charging these days is enormous, right? So they are interested in their portfolio, and the way they frame things and their USP lies in the photograph, what films they use, what cameras they use, and so on. And whether it's medium frame or large frame or whatnot, so on and so forth. The architect is interested in getting more projects and also on the authorship. And who else is being published in that magazine, right? And the client is interested in where can I position myself in the society. So these projects are helping all three, and Roland Barthes helps us understand that. But if you pick, one segment, or if you just pick up, even if you want to look at all three, that is where you can start describing these phenomena from a very, very nuanced perspective. The architect, the photographer, and the homeowner or the client, and if you want to even complicate, then the publisher, right? Like they also have their this thing, your images like have to be this way, this size, that size, and so on. CMYK, RGB, you know. So the more you get into it, the more the intentions are there and they guide what happens. So I think there is a lot of potential in this project, which if you go with the reality of it, it can be very interesting. I just, sorry. Yes, I want to say something to Prathamesh. Like, see, the word that I was looking for was atmosphere. And so you use words like scenography and visual perspectives to define immersion, but I think at some point you used environments. But atmosphere would be more like it, and atmosphere, the way Peter Zumthor also writes about, might also be very becomes very important in your, because you know everything then is translated into the visuals. Even the temperature of the environment or the atmosphere is visual in nature. So वो है. But in your case, you know, do you also write games? Like, do you code games, or do you just play?
I don't write games, but I do play and also do like kind of the process of like making it or what goes behind making it, basically the
Yeah.
construct of it.
So basic construct of
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it is like, I am imagining it is a very if then else loop kind of a thing. There are finite things that the player can do in any gaming environment. And so when there is a finite thing, then there are from infinite things, there is just a finite things that the gamer can do. So it is, that is the construction. And so that means there is not a lot of things that are getting constructed. And I think that will also, so I think what I'm again on, you know, I'm repeating myself, it has to go beyond the eye level of the animal or that character or whatnot, because the intention of that creation of an environment, there is a certain tonality. Why is that tonality? Why is that chosen? Because it has to be removed from the real world. The real world tones are very different from that. And so, you know, that definition, the atmospheric definition, you have to capture and describe.
I was looking at the atmosphere specifically. So during my thesis, I was having conversation of these, the creation of these pseudo environments. In a way, the way in which, so in a scene you saw how the fog was used as an element, and then how these lights was placed in a certain way to navigate. And in a similar way, how we nowadays use lights, like the daylight and the color balance in that. So there is a certain way in which, of course, that and the also it is the point in the games where the the atmosphere or the environment and the narrative kind of blends together to form that space. But yeah, but largely I was looking how does one move through that atmosphere itself. So but yeah, it was a, I'll definitely think about it. Yeah.
I also wanted to sort of bring in one other reference that comes to mind, and this is Michelle Caswell. Michelle Caswell is an archivist who works extensively with images, but also with media at large, thinking about our histories, our archives, our stories. And there's a brilliant text where she talks about it's not about what the image is communicating or what the image is representing, but rather what is the image doing in the world. That makes all the difference. And I'm trying to sort of think and invite you all to see this panel, because this panel is called Space and Other Mediums, right? And I'm wondering what would shift if you were to sort of say theorizing architecture in other mediums. So how is this, each of your works, inviting you to think about how we theorize architecture? so that at no point is this reduced to architecture in video games or architecture and fiction or architecture and image, but it's active theorization of architecture with the media that you have each selected for yourselves. Um, I was going somewhere with that. Gosh, it was when Pratvesh was saying. I think it's still sticking with this idea of theorizing and doing. Gosh, I think it'll come back. Michelle Caswell, so Michelle, Caswell, Caswell. Um, yeah.
We can actually open up the panel to the rest of you all if anybody has anything that they want to get in.
I have an observation more than a question. I was just wondering there's a long history of city noir writing, which kind of depicts places in very dark ways. And the way it seems to have entered the world of video games is through intense realism. And there's some shift that has kind of taken place. It's not the dark, it's not the Gotham of Batman, it's not the New York of Superman or Spider-Man, but there is some kind of move towards creating a realism that showing materiality, so on and so forth, which moves away from the city noir kind of, work that has a long history to it. Um, but what seems to be happening in the fiction writings, particularly from the 1950s, like Ursula Le Guin's writings, is the kind of the move towards kind of thinking in terms of the cyborg, or even later on to create kind of odd king. They're trying to kind of move away from the noir and then the utopia and create something that has not been existing in this kind of realm. And I mean, that's interesting, both not only for writing, but also in terms of thinking about the video game as a kind of, as a realm. Because in the video game, I mean, I'm also thinking about, like, uh, geographical information systems now, kind of all big data kind of explorations. In GIS, you insert movies, images, films, and try to create a hyper-realism about, space. So that's something that seems to be kind of capturing large data and kind of, moving in that kind, that, and just an observation.
No, I wanted to respond. I think it's very well said, and I think I'm speaking. Sorry, I'm maybe like entering into somebody else's domain, but I really want to respond to that. And I think it's this post-apocalyptic situations that feed into like our present day, imagination of what the utopia would be is in some way post-apocalyptic, but very real. And I don't know, it either feeds into the human hubris of American game writers, or it's like, just like seeing that, all right, the human will survive in any condition. I don't know, it's like coming from there. So, so
Climate change discourse that has brought this in. Just,
yeah,
I mean, from
yeah.
some things that I'm kind of trying to make some sense of.
But just, I mean, I think one of the things that both of you, I mean, your video games are all examples of rich corporate gaming industries, right? You've not selected independent gamers and the kind of shape shifting and narrative shifting that happens. And so is your sort of very well argue that ultimately architecture, the conventional practice of architecture has historically served cultural elites. So you're going to focus in that bracketing. And I appreciate that you've bracketed that out for yourself. What I was going to come back to is this idea of theory, architectural theory in other mediums, right? And so if you were to approach or reapproach or continue to approach your projects, then you begin to sort of see what are the norms, values, and assumptions coded in the design of video games, in the writing of fiction, in the very staging of photographs, which will take you back to the idea of bringing subjectivity and construction together and thinking about then what happens to architecture, as opposed to, so, again, kind of, it becomes kind of an epistemological unpacking of each of these media, and you stop seeing them as a given. Right now, you're seeing the image as a given. You're seeing fiction as you're reading it, and you're seeing video game as you're consuming it. But how do you unpack and look at, but what has made these video games? Ultimately, they're constructions. Fiction is also constructing a world as much as it is a product of a constructed world. And so epistemological underpinning to each of these will begin to tell you what kind of gendered norms are coming through those works of fiction, and hence where is the opportunity to reconfigure those gendered norms towards a much more feminist, liberatory imagination of the world. What kind of capitalist norms are encoded in these images and imaginations of our domestic realms, and where is room for doing something else with or without capital, but still sticking to the medium of photography or image. And then what kind of norms are coded in even the most well-intentioned of these video games that reduce ultimately the gamer or the player to a certain kind of a distant body moving through space. So I'm just sort of saying that use this also as an opportunity to begin to theorize architecture and not see architecture as architecture and video games, or architecture and fiction, or architecture and photography.
No, I just wanted to continue what he said, and just to, identify three moments in the presentations which sort of struck me. One was yours with the image, the painting, and sort of that balcony and the jharoka, coming into, right? So it's a moment where there's a history of a space that becomes an image, which again, then starts circulating. So there's a certain, history of how the image circulates as well as how it becomes space, and that space becomes image, right? And even in yours, it's sort of interesting because the French Revolution was everything about the crowd, right? But there's the 1 point perspective sort of diminishes the crowd in that space, and one is moving and sort of hiding, right? So there's a conceptual shift in the idea of what space is during the French Revolution, right, as compared to this assassin, or right. And for you, the last example of the monotony of the roads, and then there is this other description. So if you sort of engage with the space itself, right, rather than sort of taking it out to conclude something, but the description, because that is what text does in many ways, right? That is what images and these games do, right? So there's a certain, like he's saying, there's a certain historiography or certain sort of a episteme to how space is thought of, right, during the French Revolution, what shift the game does, right? Similarly, painting becoming an image as space. So there's something going on there. So sort of hold on to those moments to look at what is really going on. So that you have the technicals, plane of the warmth and the coolness and the deletion, but also has a historic, has a history, right? So, and that is the moment where they both come together. So what is going on in there is something would be interesting to look at.
I'm not continuing anyone's thoughts, but I can't. So I'm just kind of wanting to throw in this idea of simulacra in this whole discussion, because there's this big kind of discussion of simulacra with Baudrillard, right? And I think I remember the time when we started growing on games, and there was the 2 3 games which I clearly remember playing, which were somewhere the precursor of what you showed. The one was Doom, and this game is basically, it always happens in the interior, and you have to kill, keep killing. And I remember that everyone whom we spoke to had a feeling of uh, really this pukey feeling, that you feel so suffocated in this game that you come out like, it's a weird kind of feeling that you don't want to do this again. And the second was these arcade car games where you just know the tracks, and then there are these environments where you're just heading. And the third were these Prince of Persia types. And cut back to, so we always knew that it was not real, and still we wanted to make it real. And now the situation is reverse, where it is so real, and but what I want to actually get at it, I remember again that my first entry into the city of New York, and I felt that I've entered a computer game. Am I in real space? And there was a feeling of repulsion that I don't want to enter a fake world. It was like, that this is not real. This is, I want reality. The need for reality, um, which we see completely shift in today's games. And so I want to kind of drift towards this whole thing of throwing in and throwing out of sorts, where there was a certain relationship with reality that games built in that earlier decade versus now, where you the simulation made you feel more wanting to be in a physical world, whereas now it is actually probably the inverse, where you want to kind of be in the space game. And so I wonder that what does it do to our reality, and you know um, the interiority and exteriority of living living your everyday life. um, yeah, I just was thinking about it, so just a comment.
Uh, should we, because we have the next panel in the next.
Just one. I mean, I have a question. I mean, I have a question to ask about the overall panel, at least the question that came to my mind. I mean, one of the, in different ways, all the three of them presentations have been asking the question of how to frame. And in your conversations, Kush and Sonal, I think you all seem to be asking, and this was the question that came to my mind as I was listening to their presentation and seeing them, is the other question to ask is who's being framed? And it reminds me of Solomon Benjamin's essay, The Aesthetics of the Ground Up City, which asks that question from the other side. When you look at cities which are considered to be unplanned, unruly, so on and so forth, the question that he doesn't kind of inquire into the image of the unruly city, but he asks who's being framed and who's doing the framing. So I think methodologically, he opens up the idea of how do you kind of think about the image as a network that constructs the image rather than than a singular author constructing that image.
To sort of see what norms are encoded, that would begin to tell us, again, the idea of norms, construction, society, power, and again, your question of who's being framed and how, and who's framing and why.
Of aesthetics is also a methodological question in terms of it opens out questions about the network as much as it opens up about the image itself.
I think Vastu is going to kill us now. But just, I mean, basically, it's about world making, no? Like, what is the mechanics of world making? Whether it is in the construction of the image, whether it is in the construction of the fiction which generates certain kinds of images and worlds, or whether it is in the construction of the video game. What is this world making? What are its limits? And hence, how do you project a future from that mechanics? Right? I think if one really sort of works from that domain, one is also able to kind of leap into the future world making, right? Like how do we deal with that mechanics, and then how do we project from there?
We'll end this panel right now and we'll take a quick 15-minute break. It starts at 4, no? So we can start at 4:05 maybe. Okay, everybody can sit over here and just close your eyes for a bit. And we will begin. In 8 minutes. Okay, we begin in 8 minutes. A quick break. Okay. Thank you.